Okay, so welcome back to my channel. I am Jason, and I am back with my recap slash reaction to Fate, the Winx Saga Season 1, Episode 2, No Strangers Here. So Silva and Dowling are on their way to the barn where she's restrained the burned one. As far as they know, the monster should still be unconscious, and so she felt safe in going in to, I guess, read the monster's mind. We know at this point we realize that at the very least Dowling is an empath, but apparently she's a lot more powerful than that. But of course, just as she was starting to get some flashes of something from this creature, it, jumps up, almost attacks her, and they realize, okay, whatever they gave this monster, it wore off. So we flash to the girls' room. So they're just waking up, going through their morning routines, and Aisha is talking to Bloom and asking her basically how she slept. It's the first day, which would be the next day, so classes start, and she was asking her like how, the whole thing of finding out that she's a changeling, and it seems like Bloom is somewhat, coming to terms with that. And of course, Aisha was like, well, cheer up, today, we're going to start, classes start, and we're going to learn to control and use our magic, because of course Aisha knows that this is an area where Bloom really needs some help. So we then flash to Tara. Tara, it looks like she's about to change, but then Musa kind of wakes up, and she asked her about some text or something she posted, and you can clearly see that Tara is she's self-conscious about her body. Of the five girls in this group, she is the heavier one, and so she's, at this point, you see her trying to find a quiet place, private place to change. At this point, Stella is coming in. So if you remember from the first episode, Stella spent the night with Sky. And so as she walked in, Musa was like, oh, basically making comments about her outfit, like that looks exactly like the same you had on the night before. And then, of course, they started talking, and she asked about her ring. Bloom had to tell her that she lost the ring. Of course, Stella is about to hit the roof. She's like, that's one of our, what does she refer to it as? Crown jewels. And this is when we find out that Stella is actually the princess of Solaria, which I guess will be another realm. And that ring is one of the crown jewels. It belonged to her mother. And so now she's trying to figure out how they are going to get this ring back. So they're now in the woods, in the circle of what they call the circle of stone. I guess it's supposed to amplify their powers. And this first class is basically them showing that they can channel their powers. And so, of course, we already knew that Tara is the Earth Witch, so she had no problem doing that. Aisha is the Water Witch, no problem. Musa, she's an empath, but her power looked a lot like wind, but we go, Beatrice, we find out, is air. And of course, we know that Bloom is fire, but, so everybody kind of moved through this portion quite easily, except for Bloom. So Bloom got up there to try to channel her powers, and she was unsuccessful. You can kind of hear the other students kind of whispering, like, well, what's going on? Why is it taking her so long? This whole thing. And of course, Dowling is trying to encourage her, tell her, she needs to clear her mind. She needs to learn to block certain things out. And, it just wasn't working. And she basically kind of got frustrated and was like, you know what, it's not working, can we just move on to somebody else? And so the class ends, and she's now talking to Dowling, and Dowling is basically telling her, reiterating the same thing, like, you're going to have to learn to block things out, you're going to have to learn to focus. And then she brought up the issue of her being a changeling, and of course Dowling confirmed that she knew. And of course, Bloom is upset that she didn't tell her. Then she asked her about her parents, and Dowling was like, I don't know who your parents are, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to say anything. Like, I don't have any answers, so I guess it was just easier just to not bring it up. So of course she was hurt, but of course, you know, Dowling told her that, you know, the thing that she should focus on now is, you know, just keep training and learning to control her magic. So we flash to the specialist. Dane is sparring with someone, and I think they called her Kate, and Kate kind of won that little match they had. So of course, while this was going on, Sky and Riven they're having their little side conversations. They're kind of joking a little bit, and Sky eventually sees Stella, so he, you know, excused himself to go and talk to her. Dane kind of walked over and sat next to Riven and got on his cell phone, and Riven was telling him he needed to get off his cell phone, and of course Dane is still kind of upset about the whole alcohol thing. And he ends up saying to him, like, why should I listen to you? And Riven was like, because I know that you were creeping my Instagram.
You full creeped on my Insta last night, and I haven't told anyone.
So you can kind of tell Dane has a thing for Riven. And Riven basically, you know, told him that I'm feeling generous, so you might want to listen, because basically this feeling might not last long. But there are two things that you should focus on this turn. First of all, be careful of the friends that you make, and you should learn to focus. You know, fighting is not about size and strength; it's about strategy. And so, Riven, to show an example, Riven actually called on one of the larger guys. This guy's larger than him. To spar, and Riven basically showed him how you can take down an opponent who is larger than you with very little effort. So we flash to Stella and Sky. Stella is telling Sky about the ring and how, you know, how she's trying to get him to, I guess he has access to some maps to the lay of the land on the other side of the barrier, and so they're trying to figure out like where they need to look, or where, you know, this monster could possibly be, so they can get this ring back. And he was saying, wouldn't it be easier just to tell was Dowlings? And, you know, she was basically like, no, Dowlings is loyal to the queen, which would be Stella's mother, and she would most likely tell her mom first before she helped them. And so she's like, the whole point is trying to get this resolved, and her mother never find out that she lost that ring. So Bloom is back, you know, she's in her room. I guess she's preparing for her next class, and you can kind of see that their relationship, she's on the phone with her mom, and, you know, her mother is happy that, you know, she started to make friends, because of course we saw in the first episode where it was a struggle just trying to get her out of the house. And, you know, you could kind of see that her relationship with her mother is a lot better. So back in the cafeteria, Aisha and Musa, they're getting their lunch, and you can see Musa is kind of getting all the feels. Like, she can see that the lunch lady is in pain. There's something, you could kind of see like physical pain, like there's something wrong with her. She kind of scanned the room a little bit, and then there was this whole Twilight moment where she just came across this one person where, you know, she couldn't read him. So she is now intrigued about who this person is. So they make it over to the table where Tara and Bloom was sitting, and Aisha was like, you know what, maybe we should make a list of triggers that can help you when it's time for you to kind of practice it, you know, with using your magic, because we already understand at this point that their magic is attached to emotions. Aisha ended up mentioning, you know, the whole changeling angle, and of course Bloom was like, oh, okay, so what is this? Well, no, because at this point she didn't know that everybody knew. And Tara was like, oh, is that it? She was like, oh, well, you know, it's not a big deal. You know, Tara likes to talk, and she's always upbeat and positive. And then Musa was kind of giving her, and, you know, but the thing is, Tara is really bad at reading social cues. And so Musa was like, you know, I wouldn't, she's like, you know, telling her like, you know, I will just back away from that. And so she stopped talking. And then eventually, Sky and Stella walks up with these maps, and they're, you know, basically determined that there are only two places that this monster could be at the barn or the mill. Tara, because she's familiar with the area, said most likely it will be the barn. And so Bloom, you know, agreed to go. Aisha is concerned because she's like, you're not at a point where you can control your magic, and if something happens, then basically you're going to be left vulnerable. So Stella is like, well, you know, I mean, she was the one that lost the ring. So basically, at this point, Stella has agreed to go. And Musa, Tara, and Aisha is like, well, you know what? There's no we in this situation. Like, they ain't trying to be bothered with none of that. So after that whole situation, Bloom ends up leaving, and Sky catches up with her. They talked a little bit, and he's telling her that, you really don't have to go. Basically it's really not safe, and you don't have to feel pressure from Stella to go if you don't want to go. And, she basically said that, no, it's my responsibility. I was responsible for the ring. I lost the ring. And so I feel like it's, my responsibility to do what I can to get the ring back. And, then he started talking about his past with Stella and how, they broke up. And he was like, basically like, I don't want you to think that I'm that guy.
Sky, we just met yesterday. I don't think anything about you.
And she basically told him that, we just only met, so, I don't really think about, what kind of guy you are. And, it wasn't said in a nasty way. It was just basically like, I don't know you, so I don't know you well enough to be tripping off what you got going on with some other broad, basically. So, Beatrix and Riven, they're now in Dowling's office. They're trading quips back and forth, and he's basically asking her what she's looking for, and she's saying how, I'm looking for the stuff that they don't teach us, and, she's really not trying to go into any great detail of, basically what's going on, what she's really doing there, why she's really there. Okay, so Bloom ends up going back to the stones because she wanted to try again to try to channel her magic. But of course she was struggling, and who pops up? Stella. So Stella arrives, and she is basically goading Bloom, and of course annoying her, talking about how she's a changeling, and basically trying to she's basically trying to provoke some emotion in her to get her to channel her powers.
So put your worthless changeling hands on that bowl and feel it.
And so instead of using, I guess, the positive memories and things of that nature, Stella's whole thing of how she channels her powers is pain and anger and hurt. But in the end, Bloom was able to channel her powers, and she was excited. And Stella was like, "What? You think it's over?" So I guess they continued to stay, and she continued to, I guess, train Bloom. Howling and Silva, they're back in her office, and he was basically telling her that it's only a matter of time before, it gets around the school. I guess people are already talking, so it's better for us to use the Queen's military to basically transport this creature somewhere else, basically just to get it as far away from the school as possible. And of course, she agreed. So the next morning, you can see Silva. He's leading the soldiers into the woods to the barn so they can get this creature. He ends up seeing someone or something, run in the opposite direction. So of course he stopped to, get a close look to try to figure out, okay, well, what's going on out here? And then of course he heard the creature, realizing that the creature was free. So now it's like, okay, now it's not so much it's not like so much like we're going to pick this creature up. Now we actually have to go out and hunt this thing and capture it all over again. So Aisha and Musa. So Aisha, as she was getting dressed, she saw the book on the diary, or where Bloom basically keeps her notes and things of that nature. And so she saw like all these negative emotions, and how negative emotions is connected to power, how she can use these negative. And so of course Aisha's like, okay, I don't. What's going on here? She didn't say anything because at this point Bloom was still asleep. So Aisha and Musa, they're now, I guess, going down for breakfast, and Aisha's talking to Musa about how she's concerned about Stella's teachings and how she don't really think that Stella's approach is reliable. And of course, Musa is like, she's reading, she's able to read Aisha's emotions. Like, why are you jealous? And she's like, basically, I'm not jealous. She's like, we're roommates, and this, this is what we're supposed to do for each other. And then she starts talking to her about this guy, because there's been a few times where Musa has seen this guy, but she's not been able to catch up with him. And so eventually he appears. She could sense him, but she couldn't see him. And Aisha could see that he ends up coming through the wall. So he can actually walk through structures. And so, to kind of cut this whole thing short, Aisha, you know, he was about to walk past them. Aisha stopped him, asked him his name. His name is Sam. And basically said that my friend Musa's been stalking you, right? And so, of course, at this point, Musa's mortified. And basically like, I hate you and your children and your grandchildren. And basically, I'm going to pay you back for this, right? But it turned out pretty good. He, you know, he was a cool guy. And they, you know, Aisha left. Musa stayed and talked to Sam. So that was that. We flash to Tara. Tara's in the greenhouse and she's mixing up this tonic, this potion that's supposed to help subdue the creature. Just in case whatever, you know, her father made for him before wore off. She knew how to make it, and so she told them that that was going to be her contribution to the mission. She would make some more. So she's in the greenhouse with Dane. They are now friends. They're talking, kind of laughing, and he's receiving text throughout from Riven. Riven is basically saying, are you training today or are you picking flowers? And Dane responds like, I'm not picking flowers, asshole, or something to that effect. And then he sends a gif of a woman smelling flowers. And so it was off-putting to Dane. I guess he felt like he was making fun of him. At this point, we don't know if Dane is gay or bisexual or what. At this point, we can only see that he clearly has some attraction to Riven. And so so he ends up telling Tara that he has to go, and he walks out. She can sense that something's wrong with him, something happened, but she didn't press the issue. Beatrice, you flash to Beatrice and Riven. They're back in his room, and you know, she kind of got on him about, oh, so you're gay bashing through a GIF, and he's basically saying that I don't really, you know, I don't have an issue with him being gay. I don't care about him being gay, but he doesn't have to be lame too, and you know, all this nonsense. And so eventually Sky walks in, and Riven introduces him to Beatrix, and they started talking. And then he was asking about Stella. Riven was like, well, I checked, you know, Stella left to go meet with the military attachment from Solaria. And it was like, oh, if they're here, then they're here about the monster. Then the rumors about the monster is true. And, you know, there's going to probably be some, you know, people going to start talking, this whole thing. Eventually, Beatrice said, you know, Riven said something to Beatrice. And she was like, you know what, I'm going to go make my way to the library. And she said her goodbyes. Of course, Sky is like, that's going to be trouble. Like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And of course, Riven, you know, he's just one of those where you got to learn everything the hard way. Okay, so Bloom and Aisha, they're back in their room. And it was kind of weird at first because Aisha didn't want to say anything. But then she eventually tells her that, Aisha eventually tells Bloom that she don't like the way that Stella is teaching her. And she basically was asking her, and she was like, you know, she mentioned something from her book, and of course then the conversation went from being about Stella and Stella's methods to, oh, you were reading my book. And Aisha was like, well, no, I was just over, you know, she was over there getting something, and the book was open on the desk. And of course, you know, eventually, you know, Stella walks in because it's time for them to go and put their little plan in motion. And Bloom ends up leaving with Stella. And because Aisha knows that Bloom is in no position to defend herself, she ends up going with them. So Musa and Sam, they're talking. It seems like they're having a nice conversation. And I guess she must have mentioned that, you know, how her abilities work, and how with him, she can't really, you know, she doesn't really hear anything. And he's basically asking her to describe like the sound that she's hearing when she's with him, and like throwing out some artist names or something. And it kind of made her laugh a little bit. And then she describes it as the absence of chaos. And she was like, so what about you? And he was like, well, it's quite boring. And he was like, no, literally boring. Like, he can walk through stone and dirt. Like, he can walk through any natural structure. And eventually she gets a text from Tara basically saying that she needs help in the greenhouse. And so, of course, she had to go because, you know, they got to go and put this plan in motion. They make their way to the barn. before they can go into the barn, you can see Musa, she was sensing something. So she walked up to the side. Of course, Tara went with her. Stella and Aisha and Bloom went into the barn. They realized that the monster was no longer there. Now it was on the loose. And next thing you know, you hear Musa and Tara calling. They go out. You see all of the soldiers are just ripped to pieces. And Silva is just barely hanging on. Bloom, for whatever reason, stayed in the barn. She's kind of looking around. It flashes to her. She kind of hears like something calling to her, or calling out to her. So, of course, instead of telling them that she's hearing something, she decides she's going to wander off by herself. Eventually, they realize that Bloom is not with them. And so Tara and Musa decide to stay behind to help Silva. And Stella and Aisha went to find Bloom. Bloom is traipsing through the woods by herself. Keep in mind, she don't even know this place. So this, I mean, obviously this is just stupid, right? So, Aisha and Stella are hot on her heels, and it started to get dark. So Aisha is telling Stella she needs to use her powers.
Turn it on.
For all her bluster and all that, she couldn't use her powers. I don't know if it was real or if it was, because Stella is a manipulative, lying bitch. That's basically her character. So whether or not she was really having issues manifesting her powers, and the reason I'm going to tell you why I think that this was a bunch of malarkey. But anyway, in the end, Aisha basically told her, just go back to the school and get help. Aisha continued on to catch up with Bloom. So we flash to Bloom. She is now face to face with this creature. This creature is now charging at her. She's now trying to use her powers. She was able to manifest her powers. I mean, this thing is completely on fire, but it still didn't stop it. Eventually, you see this gust of water. It kind of throws the monster, and the monster gets impaled on a branch. So Aisha got there just in time. And they see the ring is embedded in this creature somehow. Okay, whatever. And now they're going back and forth over who's going to pull the ring out. So at this point, Aisha was like, well, you're the one that lost it, so you need to do it. And so it was this whole dramatic scene of her, trying to get this ring out of this monster again. It seemed like that was just a filler. She could have they didn't even need to put that in there. What was the point? So you see Stella, she makes it back to the school. Sky sees her. He's like, okay, what's going on? She said, telling him that they're out in the woods and that she tried to use her powers and her powers wouldn't work, and he's all, so now you would think the first thing she would say is, the soldiers are dead, Silva is injured, he could possibly die, go through that whole thing.
And then my magic wouldn't work.
Oh, no. Stella's like, oh my God, and I was out there and I couldn't use my powers, and he's like, almost consoling her to a point. So that's something like, could she really not use her powers, or was she just being full of shit and basically left them out there high and dry, similar to what she did to Bloom in the first episode when she didn't tell her about the burned ones or anything, she just let her go out there. So before this whole conversation could finish, Stella, Tara and Musa arrives, basically practically dragging Silva. Of course, his guy's attention turned from Stella to Silva. Dane ends up jumping in to help Tara take Silva to the greenhouse. Tara ends up telling Sam, go tell Dad that we need help.
Sam, go get Dad. So
we found out that Sam is actually Tara's brother. Musa was like, brother? Oh no, she said Dad. And Tara was like, yeah, Sam's my brother. And you can kind of see Musa's face like, oh, okay, oh snap. So we flash to the office, and Beatrix runs in to tell Dowling and Cullum that Silva's been hurt and he's been taken to the greenhouse. They both rush off. Of course, she stays behind because now the office is empty. She can now kind of, I guess, continue her research to find whatever it is that she was trying to find. So Silva is now in the greenhouse. Ben is there, who is Tara's father. They're trying to treat him. It looks like, whatever it was, they caught it in time and he's going to be fine. But of course, he's still injured. They're trying to patch him up. They eventually ask the children to leave. Dowling and Ben, of course, stay to to help Silva, and he tells them that he saw someone in the road, and they now know that someone actually let this thing go. So they realize there's a traitor amongst us at this point. So we flash to Dowling's office, and Beatrice is still trying to find this secret passage that we saw in the first episode, and Cullum comes in and is like, what the hell are you doing? And then he says that Dowling has like some magical spell or something on this interest. Like if anyone tries to open it that's not supposed to, then I guess she's alerted some kind of way. And you find out that Cullum is a spy as well. And because Beatrice ends up saying to him, I guess you don't know how to access it. And he was like, well, no, I'm not a fairy. I guess that's why they sent you.
I'm not a fairy. Which is why I'm assuming he sent you.
And Beatrice ends up saying that Dowling, Silva, and Harvey basically, you know, they've hid their dirty laundry long enough. It's time for it to be exposed. What that means, of course, we'd have to keep watching to find out. So later on that night, Aisha goes in to give Bloom an update. Like Musa and Tara, they're on their way back to the room. It looks like Silva's going to be okay. Stella walks in, and Bloom, of course, asks her, like, okay, well, what happened to you? And, of course, she lies and says that, oh, well, I had to come back to the school to cover for us. So then she started, asking her about the ring. She ends up giving her the ring. And she was, Bloom was saying something to her, but, of course, she wasn't all that interested. She basically like, I never want to talk about this ever again. So she snatches the ring and go into the room. Sky walks up. It looks like he came to see, him and Bloom were going to have a conversation. And then Stella calls him and he goes into her room. At this point, he realized that any chance that he ever had with Bloom is gone out the window. So Aisha and Bloom are in their room now, or their section now. And Bloom, Aisha ended up asking her, like, why did you go into the woods? And Bloom was like, well, I don't really know. I felt some kind of connection to this monster. And of course, Aisha was like, okay, well, that's weird. And so they talked a little bit. At this point, Aisha's back was to her. She sat on the bed. She was taking her socks off. And mid-conversation, Bloom just stops talking. So of course she turned around to see, what was going on. And then of course Bloom's eyes are completely white. There's no color to them at all. And of course Aisha looks scared to death. And that's pretty much how this episode ends. I guess I'll see you guys in the next video.